Tēnā koutou katoa, koutou e whakarongo mai nei ki tēnei o ngā hōtaka o Koniahi Kōrero, kua hau tēnei ko Te Aorangi Dillon, me atu ki koutou katoa i tēnei o ngā rā. Nā kei te hikaka te manoa i tēnei wā nā te mea, ko tai mai tētahi o oku wanaunga ki tōku nei taa, nā kei te kite koutou i tōna ingoa, Ali, tēnā koe Ali, Anitawaru.
Tēnā koe, kora koutou.
Nā reira e Ali ka tuku te rākau ki koe, ki te whakamoho atu ki te katoa, ko wai koe, ko wai tō ingoa, aua āhuatanga katoa. Nā reira e te whanaunga, kei a koe te wā.
Ai! Ka pai, ko waio, ko Taranaki te maunga, ko Naru e ne Naturu nui ngā iwi, ko Ngāti Tū, Ngāti Tupaia o kahu o ngā iwi, o ngā apu, ko Waingongoro te awa, no o Hawe ahau, ko Alison and Anitawaru Cole taku ingoa. Ai.
Yeah. Tēnā koe, Ali. Kei roto i te whare.
Kei roto i te whare. Ai.
Thanks so much for coming in today. We had a really good catch up, Ellie and I, just on Friday actually. I got to practice my scone making skills actually. She came around and I didn't have much in the cupboards to manaki with, so I was like, right, that's it, I'm going to make some scones, and I'm even surprised myself about how they turned out, I have to say.
Beautiful. They were so good. They were much better than the cakes I got from the shop.
Whatever, they were yum. So e te whānau, you may or you may not know Ellie. Yes, she does. She lives down at Ohawe. And I've had the pleasure or the privilege of meeting her last year actually, and that was I just love how we get pulled along to these hui. I had to be there actually, so I wasn't pulled along, but I loved how 1 minute you're not like hanging out in the hapu space, and then the next minute you're all up in there, and this is how it happens, right? You go to one hui and then that just leads on to many, many more. But the funny thing about this was Hineka and Mike had come and stayed with us a few months before. It didn't seem like that far before, that much before I met you, and they had been telling me about this wahine who they were working with. She's a whanaunga and she's living down at Ohawe, and I was like, oh, cool, man. And Hineka even said, yeah, you should just pop down there, like she's totally like that, she wouldn't mind it. I was thinking, oh yeah, okay, too much whanaunga just telling me to go down and see someone else. But anyway, as chances had it, we met at this hui, and it's been awesome ever since. Great opportunity to swap information and just see where each other is at. So on that note, because obviously I know a little bit about you, but those who are listening may not, tell us a little bit about yourself, Ellie. Where were you raised?
Yes. Okay, so the way that I fit in, usually I make it easier by just saying I'm one of the Robinsons. So my nan, she was Daisy Robinson, but also known as Olive, also known as Hilda. So we came in under those, the two who went first to Waikato and then up to Ngāpui region. So that's Eritana and Rokatana. So some people say that they were cousins, some say that they were sisters, and one was a Shelford and one became a Robinson, and one is still up at the Uripa up there near Opua. And then Eritana, she came home. So that was the mum of my nan, because for me as well, like on my mother's side, she's Pākehā. She was one of those babies that came to New Zealand during the Blitz in World War II. Yeah, and then my dad, he was coming down that line, but they had moved to Porirua because after World War II, the service officers had state housing that were allocated. So that was my understanding of it. Yeah, so I grew up in Porirua. I was mātāmua, like the firstborn. So I went to my grandparents, which maybe some of your listeners have had that experience. So I kind of was whāngai with my kōrero. So here's a bit of a legend. He did all of this. Oh, let's see. I've just got like heaps of all of his awesome carving all through the house. He taught me how to carve also. And when he passed, when I was about 16, so I went down his sisters. And yeah, so kind of travelled around, staying with all the different cousins, aunties, uncles. Yeah, and left New Zealand when I was 17 because I had a scholarship to head over to Cambridge Law School. I was a bit of a nerd. Yeah, and yeah, so that was me, and I spent quite a while working overseas on those different international courts and tribunals and whatnot. So it kind of took the pandemic really to get me back home, and that's how we reconnected.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So many interesting points there. So your koro. So were you guys like involved in takapuahia in there, or did you in Puriro?
Tika, yeah. So we were down at the marae down there with the Porirua, like the one by the river, by the waterfront there. Yeah, takapuahia. And I think there's the Katene crew down there.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Hanging out with those cousins down there as well when I was growing up.
Yeah. Where's your koro, Kiss?
Oh, Tamati Cole.
Far out.
People probably know the Soul family, like in Hawara, like Uncle Mac. Yeah, so the Souls and the Coles were the husbands of different Robinson sisters. So yeah, there's not as many Coles. There's lots of the Souls left. Yeah.
Far out. See, this is why I love this. This is why I love Koniahi Kōrero, because I get to know just a little bit more about everyone who I talk to. So you went to Cambridge. You went to Cambridge, and obviously you graduated as a lawyer. So plain speak here, a lawyer in something specific, or just a lawyer, or what happens there?
Yeah, good question. So when I went through law school I started in the late 90s. So it was a real interesting time because it was right after the end of the Cold War. So we had this kind of sense of like American or democratic values, and there was a lot of like human rights work that was kicking off because like after the Cold War, there was just a lot of kind of openness to really do legal work that had that kind of public interest vibe to it. Yeah, so I ended up doing mainly war crimes work. Yeah, so I would say that was sounds weird to say that my specialty was war crimes investigations, but yeah, that's straight out of grad school. That was the area of focus, and it was really because there were just so many UN tribunals. The Rwandan genocide had just happened. The war in Bosnia had just happened. So those were the first two tribunals that I worked at. Yeah, and then it kind of prepared me well for coming back to New Zealand, right? Aotearoa, we have some ongoing wars, some historical war crimes investigations that are still underway. Yeah, so in a way, yeah, that kind of became quite a narrow area of focus for my legal work quite early. But as things progress, with so what is that, 20 years now? So I'm in my early 40s. And I started, my first UN job was when I was 24. But all of those conflicts all of the investigations, even though it was in a war crimes context, it was all about natural resources. It was all about fighting for control of land. And that is why I would say now my legal specialty is indigenous rights, looking at natural, kaitiakitanga. Sometimes that's called natural resources. That makes me feel a little uncomfortable, that word. Sometimes it feels a bit capitalist. But my big passion is helping prepare our communities for climate as it changes. And especially trying to focus on stopping fossil fuel companies, putting more of this stuff into the atmospheres. And it's just huge for us here in Taranaki. And I'm sensitive to the fact it's also like people's jobs and livelihoods. And it's just really, it's amazing trying to work with your cousins, work with your whanaunga, and kind of get into these real juicy, sensitive, delicate issues. And you do so much awesome mahi around that.
Oh my gosh! So I just caught myself. I just looked over at myself, and I was like. Like looking at you like, hey, war crimes. And I mean, I just got to ask a few more questions. Well, okay, just one more question on the war crimes. So you're fresh out of law school, essentially still a young person, growing up in Porirua, but you've done a little bit of travelling around the motu with your kwekwe's. And then you go to Cambridge, and then you're like thrust into like world wars. Man, oh my, what's the ish, man? That is wow.
What's the ish? Yeah, Porirua in the 80s was a good training zone, training ground for war zones. Yeah, it was, so I went to grad school over at Harvard Law School, and one of my teachers, she was actually an expert witness at the Rwanda Tribunal. And looking back on it, so I think we're way more mindful now of well-being, and especially protecting our rangatahi. And there's certainly with the rangatahi I work with and the students that I work with at the law schools around the motu and a few overseas, super mindful, because I'm still working in those investigations, especially they call it open source investigations, or OSINT, or remote investigations. So yeah, just really careful on doing that work in a way that keeps people safe and healthy. But yeah, back then, I was like, just get into it. my graduate thesis was actually to analyze all of the evidence about what had happened to women during that conflict, during the Rwanda genocide. So back then, there was still this idea that what happened to women in war was not a crime. And basically, I reviewed the evidence database. There was like 600 statements. That was my master's thesis, my graduate thesis. And I found that like most of these crimes happen to women in very public places. So I kind of made an argument to the prosecutors working there that we needed to update the charges to include these allegations to reflect women's experience. Yeah, and I think as well, maybe that's how it happened so quick, because like, I guess folks didn't really want to, it's sometimes very hard to get professionals to look at like marginalized or vulnerable groups. So I think in a way, looking back at it made sense that it was like kind of a young female, feisty, naru hine natiro nui. Just being like, nah, like get stuck in with this. Yeah, but it was brutal. Yeah.
Yeah. So is it like the movies?
Yes, actually. It is. It's like it's kind of a combo, because like some of it is, you know, like you wear the bulletproof vest, the flak jacket, and the helmet, and you have all these like protocols on security check-ins. You have your walkie-talkies. you have all these like kind of code words and cover stories and like different mechanisms with translators and security guards and whatnot. But then some of it is just sitting around waiting for witnesses to show up or waiting so it's safe to get out of the UN compound. Yeah, but most of it's pretty unglamorous and quite scary. But there's like also, and the thing is, because doing that work was just because my first deployment was around the time that Ngāti Nui got the settlement, and my cousin Tony Soul, one of the souls, he'd written that book. Yeah, and just reading his book at the time of my first deployment, and I was like, this is the same stuff that's like is all over the region here. Like Aorangi went, I mean, they called it a Holocaust in the Waitangi Tribunal report. It's pretty epic, like just to reconcile like how much we ourselves have to contribute in understanding the process of reconciliation. So it's been a journey.
Just a little bit of one, just a little bit of a journey for you there, you know, in your spare time from the age of like, 17 till 40 something, 40-ish. You've been on a journey around the world, guys, just been traveling, seeing the sights and, you know, like in war zones. So we flattered, when we lived in Australia, we flattered with a wahine over there. She was Icelandic, and she used to work as an administrator to a security company over there. And do you know what? I kid you not, until you just said all of that stuff then, I used to always wonder if she like was embellishing the truth sometimes. Because she would say, we've always got vests on, we have to be chaperoned, and this and that and the other. It wasn't that I didn't believe her. It was just like, it was so unbelievable. Like the life we were living in Australia was like, it was party time, basically, you know, like, and she was pretty level-headed. I just assumed that if you lived in that environment, you probably wouldn't be, you know, you'd be like trying to escape that in your mind. But no, she was pretty much like, oh yeah, we always just had to make sure we were doing the right thing. And and now I know.
It's unreal, like, and what gets me is like how other people might think that way about us. You know, like we take our way of life for granted, but I think there's a lot of people around the world who would, you know, hear about the way that even when I connect with friends of mine living in New York, for example, where I was based most recently, and talk about how we have like the mara down at the pa, and like the work that we do together, and the efforts like yesterday where we were trying to get representation at the regional council. And sometimes, you know, people hear that and they're like, what? Like you guys are like living like off the earth, or you guys are kind of like where your tribe, you know, like sometimes it's like we've got to give ourselves more credit for just how much we're doing by just living as Māori, like totally like we are here and we are like taking our space, and we're coming into all the spaces, the political space, the environmental, the economic. We've always been here, and we're like expressing loud and proud like Māori time. But it's funny, like sometimes you hear different worlds and you're like, oh whoa, it's kind of a trip. But like same with us, like we're just living it, but like we've got so much to offer. We're just sharing our way of life, and you know, we need actually more of that, because like the way the world's going, without the kind of modalities of life, you know, the values that Māori have and how we build our social structures and political structure. And I'm getting really nerdy now, you can tell. Like,
Go for it.
Somebody went to law school and is a bit of a nerd, but we have so much to offer. And this is like the way the world's going. We've got serious challenges, like the climate, obviously, but capitalism isn't working. Like racism is like getting to the point of like race war, class war, like you name it. Like to have something positive and constructive that's wholesome and healing and working, like the way that Māori live their lives, you know, and how we live here in Taranaki especially. Like, I'm so proud of us, and to get that kind of into mainstream spaces in New Zealand, and to build that Te Tiriti co-design partnership model, but then take it, like, there's so many folks all around the world who we have some kind of big revolutions going on, I think, and Māori, we're leading it.
Yeah. So, okay. So we had a little bit of talk about where this was going to go, this kōrero, but I'm feeling like we can go wherever we want, really. So you've done all this work, you've got all of this experience, global experience also. And now you're back home, and you're literally working with hey, and Whānau, when we say working for your people, like, she's like the rest of us, man. Ain't no one getting paid for this. Like, you go away, you get these flash degrees, and you got your masters, and you're not a doctor yet, you don't have a PhD. I'm not being rude and not addressing you Dr. Ali Cole yet, and that's what you should be.
Yeah, I'm getting there, eh? I started that in May, I think. Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Because I just needed, what do they say? Like, I just feel like needed one more degree.
Right, yeah, like, why not? So she's on track to become a doctor too, but like many of the academics who have come from Ngā Roihine have all spent a lifetime contributing to our people. You know, there's this stigma and this misconception that the more letters you have in front of or behind means that you're just like not doing nothing for free anymore. But sorry, Kazi, to you. It's the same for all of us. So what's it like? I mean, I don't know if I could say to you yet what's the most fulfilling role you've taken on so far, because like your life isn't even nearly over, but you know, when you think about the fact that you're living back in your own rohe, you're at Ohawe, like, hello, you know,
paradise on earth.
Yeah, how much more tūturu to your tūranga waiwai does it get, I guess? What's this like after all of this overseas experience?
Oh, it's interesting because I kind of never, like, I've never really planned my life. I've never had, you know, you hear some people say, oh, you've got a 5-year plan, or you need to have a strategy or whatever. I just feel like I'm wafting along. And honestly, the things have usually been by accident. Like, me even getting into war crimes was because I ticked the wrong box in my law school application form, straight up. And even getting to Cambridge, that was because I wasn't wagging off class, but in high school I was on a long walk from the toilet. And I ran into this old Japanese dude, and he was lost. And yeah, so we were just having a chat, and he invited me on a scholarship back to his sister city, because it turned out he was, and at the time, because, you know, I was rough as guts and I didn't realize, I still don't know much fancy stuff. So he was like, he was like Mr. Panko, and I was like, oh, what's that? And he's like, oh, breadcrumbs. And I was like, because he was a multi-billionaire. I was like, how did you make money from breadcrumbs? This sounds really suspicious. But
Was
it's like
it
that,
him?
yeah. Oh, you've heard of them? You know, the Panko. Yeah. And that's how I ended up at Cambridge, because whilst I was over there in Japan, it was before internet, you know, so there was the only email address was like through the student teacher, and he had just graduated from Cambridge. So basically the librarian at my school was receiving my grades, and then she emailed this guy in Japan, and he was like, oh, you should apply to Cambridge for these grades. And I was like, oh yeah, all right, give it a shot. And that's all because I was kind of wagging class. So like nothing has been planned. So I was always mindful, because my koro was so special, like, and because we had a really close relationship, and because he'd taught me so much around, like, he did a lot of different types of art. So he gifted me all of his stencils from his wood carving. He taught me, and like, I know there's a lot of tikanga discussion about whether women like could do whakairo, but perhaps my grandfather was an early radical feminist. So yeah, here I am. So I always had a sense that my pathway was through wood carving or like something like that, and it really, I didn't think that I'd come back to New Zealand maybe ever, to be honest, because whilst I was whāngai with like I have no contact with my parents, because that was a very difficult, like I had a difficult time with both of them. They were very young, and I went through like being a ward of state because of the stuff that they were going through and what was happening to me as a result. So, and I still have no contact with either of them. And that, like, it's so sad because I just couldn't wait to get away. Like as a teen, when I was 17, because when Kōrero died, it was just like everything just, spiraled out of control. And I guess it kind of took the pandemic. It took the pandemic, and to the credit of everybody here in Taranaki, like I was scared. Like if there's anyone listening to this, like how awkward you feel coming back. You know how awkward you feel, like the hui where we met, where you're sitting in the marae, but your reo is rubbish. Like you haven't been there, you know that it's all about kanohi ki te kanohi, and your kanohi has been like wee wah wah all over the place. So I just felt like I was scared. I was totally ready for, and I thought it would have been justified if people were like, well, where the hell have you been? Like, like we've been doing the hard yards, you're off tiki touring. Yeah, you've been in war zones, but still, I didn't know how it would go down, but like yourself, like the moment we met, it was like warmth and happiness, and like your vibe is so awesome, and like your ma'i is so cool, and there's just this energy, nauru in the energy of like getting it done. And I'm trying to be really mindful, like gently, I'm just trying to learn. Like it's a long journey, I think, now of reconnecting for me. But yeah, like your earlier question of like what's the highlights or whatever, what resonated most, I think it was coming back and like through a confluence of like different events and random connections with people, I've started to support the years of work on takutai moana. And because I'm an oceans person, like love that porirua, rough ocean, sailing, anything in the ocean is me. So to come home just as the need was there to support takutai and to sit listening with kaumatua and experts, and like everyone who is just as, like you said, you do this. Kaitiakitanga is life. Like you're doing this work, it's not paid, but it's the culture, it's the tikanga, and as a fresh returnee to be at the feet of our kaumatua. Oh, it gets me because it's just beautiful. It was so good, and just a taonga. So it's funny to kind of come full circle. And I think the depth, the having that work in war crimes gives that depth to understanding what our people have been through.
Yeah.
But to keep this beauty of the relationship with Te Taiao, it's bloody awesome. And to welcome people home, it's bloody awesome. Yeah. Yeah,
cool.
Wipe my eyes.
So, and that is I've interviewed a few people, and I guess it's hard because we're all in the same space because we've all got the same sort of thought pattern that's going on. Yeah. So you do try to provide or bring a bit of what's it called, different things to the show, to Koniahi Kōrero. But at the end of the day, everybody, it doesn't matter how different we may think, it comes back to the Taiao every single time.
Yes.
And I mean, there's an element, and there are, these factions of our people out there who don't understand how important, or not how important, but how much this type of work matters just as much as the on the ground mahi matters as well. But what they also sometimes don't understand is the ones who are doing this mahi, the interviewing, the collecting the evidence and all of that, collating it and then putting it into a claim or whatever. Generally, they are actually kaitiaki, like on the ground kaitiaki too. So we get that lived experience coupled with the, what would I say, the academics? I don't know if I would say that. I would never consider myself that much at this point in time. But, lived experience coupled with the push, I guess, to get these things across the line. Now, you said something at that first hui, and I've heard you say it to me again, and I'm just trying to remember exactly what it was, but it was something like we should be able to claim, like, I don't know, so many kilometres out to sea from our shore. What was that?
Yes. So, and I love how you just referenced like all the different forms of knowledge, and that this is a perfect example of it, because there's all these interesting like legal definitions, and I always kind of thought of myself as a bit of a translator, because I grew up in Kōrero, like that's like keeping it real, like legit. So like there's a way that gets into your mind, because I always imagine when I'm doing my legal work, which gets very academic or highfalutin or a very kind of colonial Pākehā space, like privileged white space, and I always try to think how to translate that to keep it real and accessible. And there's like so much weird like barriers that those systems put up on purpose to try to make it harder to access. And so like on your question there, when we're talking about the foreshore and seabeds, like what I'm trying to figure out, like how much we work within that system to create our own freedom, like to protect to create space, or God, it's so hard to talk about, because I feel like we are here, like we are the kaupapas, so that we are the space is here, but there's so much encroachment coming in from all these other systems, and you get these moments like the Foreshore and Seabed Acts, where those things kind of come and clash in real time. And so to answer your question about like the different ways of measuring space and connecting that to our rights, so there's real interesting things where the law says, well, we're going to look at what you as a peoples have done over history, and then we're going to put like a measurement on that. All right, so we're giving you 25 meters. That's the like Foreshore and Seabed Act type law in terms of what Māori, according to how the colonialist system has looked at Māori activities, and said, all right, so you're fishing and maybe you're collecting shellfish, so you can have that 25 meters. Now, if you look at the Pākehā legal systems, they take that line for themselves out to 200 nautical miles, which is roughly like 400 kilometers. So when you can traverse like different worlds and kind of have that translator role, it puts it in stark contrast, because you can say, all right, so here's 25 meters. Now, how is that fair compared to your 400 kilometers?
Yeah.
You know, and that's just a symbol, that's a metaphor, because that replicates across so many different spaces within, you know, socio-economic life. And it just, I think the way I draw it back is the phrase of, you know, being a good tipuna and thinking, going into the future, I'm really mindful of trying to protect our te taiao spaces, because as the climate is changing and we're seeing all the scientific predictions, there's going to be a new demand for land.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm worried. I'm worried that that could look like another wave of confiscations, and it could look like a new clampdown of capitalism, like a reinforcing of like unbalanced power relationships between workers and companies, things like that.
Right.
Yeah, so part of me is like thinking, how do we really embrace and protect our way of life, so that like our healthy well-being, flourishing mechanisms of really excelling, like Māori excellence, how can that become the future? And
Yeah.
you know, like I try not to think too much about like the negative or the risks, like I don't want to talk about smashing the patriarchy or smashing capitalism, because I want to grow the matriarchy and facilitate like indigenous knowledge and regeneration and
Yeah.
growth. Hey.
Wow. Okay. Oh my gosh, man. That's awesome. And Etifano, I'm just going to be straight up. I am conscious of time right now because Ellie has got a pretty highfalutin we to attend in about 8 minutes. Kare, this is part 1. We can always come back to part 2, part 3, part 4 of this kōrero. It's never over. That is the deal that I make with everybody. If in like 2 weeks' time you're like, oh, I didn't talk about this, then we can come back and we can talk about whatever that is. But right now, e te whānau, yeah, kei te mihi au ki koe e te whanaunga mo tō whaiwā ki te noho tahi ki a hau. O ti rā ki te marea e wakarongo mai nei. Yeah, really, really grateful for you finding a bit of time in your day to come and talk with all of us today. And hopefully all the cousins don't start trying to find you in Ohawe and be like, oh, cuz, can you give us a hand with this and give us a hand with that, which will probably happen. But
my scones are not as good as yours. I'll just put that out there right now.
Nā reira, e te whānau, koutou rā e wakarongo mai nei ki tēnei o ngā pāpāo kei te mei kātu ki koutou katoa, tēnei pāpāo mataora hoki, ko te tūmanako e noho haumaru ai tātou katoa ki roto i wā tātou nei kāinga. Nā reira, e te ti, e te tā, hei konei, hei kona, tūrau, Hawaii ki.
Ooh, nā me